Hi LinkTree fam! Today we are doing our foster care journey, and we think of it as phase 2 of that journey, which was teenagers. If you are new to our channel, I am Raya.
And I'm Shaun.
And we have been foster parents for the last 8 years, and we adopted 10 kids from foster care. So today is our story about teens. So after we adopted Jade, Lily, and Gavin, that was in 2016, and we took a little bit of a break. So from January to April, we didn't have any placements, and we kind of just settled into our new, family. And we ended up we were getting ready to take new placements again. And we talked to our foster care consultant with our agency, and we were trying to decide what we wanted to take, because you get the option of male, female, behaviors, medical conditions, and all kinds of things. So we were trying to decide age range, and we were told about a pilot program that Nebraska was doing, and at the time they were calling it the 5-day stay program. And basically what happens is when kids come into foster care or they're looking for a new placement for them, a lot of times teens with behaviors have just a harder time finding a placement. So the idea of this program is they were going to give the caseworkers a little extra time to find those teens a good placement. So they would come into care, and then they would call us and say, hey, we have this teen, we need you to take them for 5 days so we can have an extra 5 days to find them a good place. But it didn't always go that way.
Yeah. We had already had experience raising teens.
Yep.
We didn't think it was going to be too hard, but these were kids. A lot of times it wasn't just that houses were filled up and they didn't have a place. These were kind of hard placements. Yep. They had backgrounds that weren't real great, and yep. They came a lot of times with some baggage, at least on paper. Yep. Sometimes in the world of foster care, there's what's called a honeymoon period, which you've probably heard Raya talk about that before. But what this was nice, we thought, for our family and for us, is we felt that that 5-10 day window where it is kind of like a honeymoon for us and for them, and their true character doesn't come out during that right. 5 to 10 day period, mm-hmm. where you kind of feel like everything's new and you're kind of figuring each other out. So when we started, we had that in mind, that maybe these tougher kids to place wouldn't be bad in short spurts. And
we had a lot of experience with teens and behaviors. Right. And so we kind of felt like it would be a good fit. Now, when we first started, when you're starting something brand new like that, you don't know what to expect. So we were our agency's 5-day stay home. So every agency wanted to have at least one home, and so we were our agencies. And they ended up adding homes later, but we were kind of like the trial home. Right. So we tried it out, and I feel like what we found is that when they would call us, we weren't really supposed to be able to say no. They were supposed to be able to call us and then say, this is who's coming. There were a few times where we actually did say no, that we did not think that for what the behaviors were, that they would be a good fit because right. of our little kids. Right. And that only happened, I think, twice. But they would call you and they would tell you, here's what we know. And a lot of times they had problems with drugs, alcohol, sometimes weapons, aggression. Runaways. Or they call them runners, I think, when they go into foster care, yeah. and they run. Yep, a runner. And that happens. And we had a couple of those. Yeah, we did. Yeah. So we'd get the phone call, they'd tell us about the child and what they knew, and then they would bring them in, and usually their caseworker would be with them. And then we would have to do all this paperwork to place them. And then we kind of would just let them, we'd show them their room, let them put their stuff in their space, and a lot of times they didn't come with much, but we'd just kind of let them get acclimated to our home, introduce them. You know, they always had, I feel like, in the very beginning, like the first few hours, this like tough face on. You know, it was like, I'm tough, I don't like you, you know, don't talk to me, and that went away really fast.
Well, I think we got seasoned to that condition coming into the home, and we're very warm when kids come. No matter what their background is, usually it's a very warm welcome. Here's our area, here's our space, here's the outdoors, here's some bikes that the kids use. Go ahead and have fun. You know, we do have some rules to go over, but we figured out, I think, how to make them at ease, and they didn't know what to think of it, which was kind of funny.
Yeah, and so there was one girl that came, and she was 18. So in the state of Nebraska, you're not an adult until you're 19, so kids stay in care until they turn 19. So she came, I'm pretty sure she was 18, and she had on this tough face, like didn't want to like us, and we were just being normal, and we were like, hey, here's this, and here's this, and if you want to do this, here's that, and she said, could you guys stop? I'm having a really hard time not liking you. And I thought that was just hilarious.
Yeah, they come in, usually those kids were seasoned foster kids. They had been in and out of the system quite a few times.
Yes.
And their rap sheet wasn't good.
Right.
So this was old hat to them to come in and just, act like they run the show, or, they've got a bad attitude, which, I think it's self-preservation. I think they have figured out a way to not feel like they're going to get hurt.
Yep.
And protect themselves.
Yep. Their guard is up. Yeah, right. Yeah. So out of the kids that we took in probably about 15 teens through that program, I believe.
Yeah, a couple times we had 2 or maybe 3 at a time.
At the same time, yep.
Yeah, which was sometimes easier to have a couple of them so they could interact. And,
yes, I agree with that.
They didn't get along all the time.
Not all the time.
Yeah, and these were teens. Some of them were 16, I guess.
I think the youngest one we took in was 15, maybe, no, 14. The youngest one was 14 that we took, and the oldest one was 18. We had actually several 18-year-olds. And then we could decide if we wanted to take them in as an actual placement, or if we wanted to...
like a long-term placement, not just the 5 days.
Right, not just a 5-day stay, right. We did take in 2 of those kids as just regular placements. And then there were a couple of them that didn't stay long. One kid stayed for just 1 day. But normally what would happen is they'd call us up and they would say, we haven't found anywhere for them to go yet. Can they stay another 5 days? So we had some kids at our house in the 5-day stay program for a couple months.
Right.
And so, some of the kids were just really hard to place. And I do agree, with the honeymoon phase. There's always this honeymoon phase. I feel like that comes more with older kids than it does with younger kids. And so they would come in and they'd be on their best behavior. And a lot of times, we had a couple boys, and they would hang out together in the basement and play video games, and but they'd come up and interact during dinner, and they loved our little kids. You always have this fear of these teens and your little kids. And I'm sure there are stories out there that people have where it wasn't a good fit. But for us, all of the teens that we had did really good with our little kids.
They did, and it seemed like one of the reasons is they were separated when they were taken from the environment they were in. They needed to get removed. And when they're removed, a lot of times they will split those kids up into little subgroups. And they have been in the house with their siblings who were younger, like the kids that we have here. Right. And our kids here came in to us through foster care too. So they kind of have, a heart for those kids coming in.
So
they
yes.
felt very comfortable with those younger kids.
Right.
They felt like a big brother or a sister at the time.
Yeah, and so I was pleasantly surprised by that because that wasn't what I was expecting, but it turned out really well. They played with the kids and interacted really well with our little kids.
Yeah.
There were a couple kids that we had quite a bit of trouble with, and
Yeah, there were.
So some of those I feel like bad stories, and I don't like looking at them as bad because like a bad story because I feel like we learned a lot during this time. But there were some really super challenging kids, and you know, I had somebody say one time in the comments that it was mean to call them challenging, and they just, there's really no other way to explain them. They're very challenging, and they're not bad kids. I think they have good hearts and they're good kids.
They do, and that shows with the younger kids that we have in the house at the point, you know, when they'd come in. You'd see the soft side of them because of the younger kids that they're interacting with. And yeah, so.
But we had, like, one of the kids got super aggressive, tried rushing at me, and just started like grabbing things that he could grab and throwing them and breaking things. I had some sentimental things and I think he knew they were sentimental, so he grabbed and broke those. So this child in particular, we ended up having to call the police.
Yeah, that was a bad night.
That was a bad night, yes.
Yeah, and it had led up. He was there for like a month and a half, 2 months.
He'd been there, yeah.
And he just kept, once that honeymoon period's over, you know, sometimes it lasts 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But once it's over, you start to see the character of the child come out where they're not trying to impress anybody. They're just, you know, the day becomes a regular day.
Right.
And they get bored. They, you know, I think, you know, they have past memories of situations that can come up over time.
Yep.
Things are bound to come up that's going to trigger them.
Well, and let's say, so these kids, these teens, there were multiple of them that that came into foster care not because of anything the parents did wrong, but because the parents couldn't handle the child because they were so out of control.
Right.
So some of the teens that we took in were in foster care because of their self and because
their behaviors, and they just couldn't. The parents couldn't handle them.
Right.
And we get that. We get that. We had one of our older daughters. Ended up
was tough.
Yeah. And she ended up needing outside help.
Yeah, right.
So we get it.
Yeah, and you know what I felt good about was I could identify with that because I'd been through it. So I had one of the moms call me and she was just in tears and she said, you know, I'm so thankful that I have somebody that can identify with that because nobody else understands. And so that really felt good that, you know, you could understand what somebody else is going through.
Right.
So then we had another one, and he was actually the only child that we've ever given notice on. And he had some, he was 15, but he had FAS. He was born with FAS, so that's fetal alcohol syndrome.
That's a tough one.
And so, and I feel like there's different degrees of that. So like Gavin has ARND, which is alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, and that is just a higher functioning form of FAS, basically. But if you have full-blown FAS, I still feel like there's a spectrum. But he was very low functioning, not medically, but intellectually and behaviorally. And so we took him in, and he like, I felt like he flourished. They said that he did so well. He was doing so much better. But again, there's always a honeymoon period. But you've talked about him before where you had to take off of work. Shaun had to take off of work like multiple days to help because I just couldn't handle him by myself.
Yeah, I was still in chiropractic at that time, and I kind of had a fairly strict schedule because people could just do walk-ins all the time into my clinic. Well, it never seemed to fail. It got to be about 3 times a week.
Yeah.
The special school that he was going to would call and say, well, he has ran from the building and didn't get on his bus, and now he's back in the woods behind the school. And we were wondering if you could come help. And that was just one of many days that there were problems. He would just get to school in the morning sometimes, and he would sit on a bench or go into the principal's office or vice principal's and just sit there and not go to class. He would just sit there, and they would call me, and there were many different scenarios, but they all required me to close shop, go, chase him down out in the woods or whatever it was. And it sounds maybe worse than it was, but he was just acting out because either he felt like something was up.
Yeah, I think he wanted control or
system,
something, and he couldn't get the control he was looking for, I think. Sometimes I think it was attention. He was a huge attention seeker, and so I think a lot of times it had to do with that.
But I think the final straw for us, we are pretty tough. We'll go along with some pretty intense situations.
Yeah, we do.
We isolate our children, and when things start to, we see it starting to escalate. We take our kids and we make sure they're safe, put them to bed if it's in the evening, turn their TVs on so that there's no noise and they can't hear, because you really have to watch that. You don't want any more damage to occur to them.
Right.
After you've invested so much and
so those are called safety plans.
Right.
So you would have a safety plan in place where you know that when this happens, you're going to do this. And so we had many of those safety plans over the course of our foster care career.
But back to what caused that, I think that was the only one, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. That was we gave notice on was he had started to have an episode, and he ended up grabbing a knife and saying some
pretty scary things.
Yeah, things that we felt like that's enough. I think we've pushed this enough for ourselves, and that's where we got with our biological daughter. There was just a point where it seemed like we were safer and she was safer. In this case, he was safer, having more eyes on him and more structured environment than a house and a home environment with small kids.
And he did end up going on to a PRTF, which is so it's like a residential treatment facility for children, and it's where they go and they work with them, in this setting. And
locked doors.
Yeah, locked. Right. They can give them just more one-on-one attention. Right, and then they can keep them safe there. And so he went on to do that. Now during this time, I don't want to scare anybody with teens, because I think ultimately teens are great.
Yeah, they're manageable. I mean, there's in our case, it was 1 in 15, 20 kids that had a pretty long rap sheet, each one of them in their own way.
Yeah.
But it was only one that we felt like we couldn't handle properly.
Right. And so when we were doing the 5-day stay program, we were actually considered professional foster parents. So there are in Nebraska, and I know in other states they have different levels. In Nebraska, you have 2 levels. So you're either a regular foster parent or you're a professional foster parent. And professional means that you take the higher medical needs, the higher behavioral needs. So at this time we were considered professional. And with professional, that meant you had to have one parent who was available at all times to cater to that child. So if you had to go pick them up from school or, whatever, all the medical appointments and...
Which sounds easier than it really is when you have 2 parents, working together to try and make it happen.
Yeah.
When you've got kids at home, you've got to have 2 just to manage your normal part of the day, because one person's just tied up completely watching the kids currently that we have.
Right.
So
that was an experience. So we did professional foster care, the 5-day stay program, it was April of 2016. And then we did it all the way up until about August of 2016. So not a long time, but by that time our agency had, I think maybe, 2 or 3 other homes doing it as well. And Shaun at the time got a calling, and you tell him about your calling.
Well,
what was our next phase?
I felt like when these kids would come to our home and we would get attached. I mean, we were we bonded with these kids. I mean, we've talked about this in other videos, but you know, after they're in your home for a day or two and they sleep underneath your roof, they're depending on you, you have a soft spot for them. In saying all that, I guess I had gotten to a point where I loved kids. I loved the numbers of kids and how they ended up interacting with each other. It's almost like they had instant friends when we would take those younger kids in when we were fostering. But the hard part was always having them leave.
Right.
So we went, you know, we adopted our first 3.
Yep.
And then eventually the 4th in that set.
Yeah.
But I just kind of had a calling. I felt like, let's adopt some kids. You know, let's get a lot of kids and see if we can't keep them together.
Yeah.
Because the hardest thing we learned with these kids is when they're separated from their siblings. I mean, they feel lost.
A lot of kids get separated from their siblings.
Yeah.
Because it's hard.
I don't think they want more than 1 or 2.
Nope.
They feel like they can't do it.
I couldn't even believe, they told me it was hard to place a sibling group of 3. And I just was taken aback by that because to me, I don't know, even at that time, I thought 3 was small. That's a small group. Right. Yeah, right.
And we had raised 3.
But there's, you know, these groups of kids that come into the system and there's 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, sometimes there's as many as 12, and sometimes some have already been adopted out, and then they have more, you know, and so. But I mean, there are some big groups.
So that's kind of the story behind our second sibling group that we've adopted and began to foster. But we'll tell that story on our chapter 3.
On our journey 3. Yeah.
But,
so the one thing that I wanted to say about your calling though was. So Shaun came to me and said, I want you to look at something on my computer. And I said, okay. And so I went over and he had this sibling group of 6 pulled up. And he said, oh my gosh, look at those little stinkers. And it was this group of 6. And I'm like, what? And he's like, I really feel like we're being called to foster a large sibling group. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, and that was, you know, I think in my heart it was about keeping them all together and not having to watch them be separated and live. You know, once they're separated, there's a good chance one or 2 or 3 each group in that separation will be adopted, or they will not ever get rebonded.
Right.
Like normal siblings.
Yeah.
And they grow apart, and then next thing you know, it's been 20 years and they're looking for those other kids. But it's a sad state of affairs when that happens. So it became just a feeling in my heart that it would be awesome to feel like we kept a family together. And we enjoy those kids. We love it. We love it.
So we were done. We told our agency worker in August of 2016 that we were going to be done with the 5-day stays. Well, we weren't technically done. We said we would be done after they placed a group. So they went out and started looking for a group for us. In the meantime, we went ahead and kept doing the 5-day stays. But they knew that we were going to be coming to a close doing the teens. And then they were actively looking for us for a large sibling group. And I'm going to tell you, it took longer than I thought it was going to take. I figured they'd find one like that.
Well, we were used to kids coming in and out of our house and that whole process. And when we stopped that 5-day stay, it was like, man, something seems to be missing, and when is this going to happen? And each day felt like a week.
Yeah,
but,
it did.
How long was it? A month or a month and a half?
It took 3 months.
3 months.
Yep. So make sure that you catch our next video, which I guess it's kind of like a phase 3 is how I look at it. And that is when we got our last placement that led to eventually years and years of foster care and then eventually adoption. Right. So we will do that story next. But thanks for joining us for our teen video, and we'll see you guys next time.
See ya.
Bye.